prakritir uchyate, purusha sukha dukhanam bokritve hetur uchyate. And the translation is, nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The different manifestations of body and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. There are 8,400,000 different species of life, and these varieties are creations of the material nature. They arise from the different sensual pleasures of the living entity, who thus desire to live in this body or that. When he is put into different bodies, he enjoys different kinds of happiness and distress. His material happiness and distress are due to his body and not to himself as he is. In his original state, there is no doubt of enjoyment. Therefore, that is his real state. Because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing. The spiritual world is pure. But in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire different kinds of pleasures for their body. It might be more clear to state that this body is the effect of the senses. The senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, body and instrument senses, are offered by material nature. And as will be clear in the next verse, the living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desire and activity. According to one's desire and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters. The being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters, and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. Once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature, because the body, being matter, acts according to the laws of material nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he is put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. He cannot act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he is forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. But in all circumstances, the super soul is with the individual soul. That is explained in the Vedas, Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.1 as follows. Dva Suparna Suyuja Sakkaya. The Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul and in all circumstances is present as the super soul or Paramatma. Translation again is, nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So, in this, Prabhupada explains very clearly that once the body is given, and the body comes from two things. What are the two things he mentions in the purport? Who is listening? Desire, the first thing. Activity, right? So activity, that's karma. So not just your desire, otherwise no one desires a body that's going to give suffering. But it's more than, it's desire, and Prabhupada sometimes use the word deserve. You get what you deserve. You get what you desire, but you also get what you deserve. And then when you're placed in that body, and he uses the example of the dog. My wife and I, we've experienced another example in the last few days going to Panchagoda's house. There's a young bull calf. He was very, very sweet. A few days we would bring out scraps, prasadam and scraps to feed him, and he was one of the most excitable creatures I ever saw. As soon as he saw the bull, he was prancing around. You could hear his little heels on the ground, his hooves, as he was jumping and very excited, very happy. And then by the fourth day, he was a bull calf. Wasn't a cow. Wasn't a little cow, it was a little bull. As soon as we approached him, he put his head down and just started pushing him. Just started pushing, first on my wife, and of course she gave up everything. So I thought I would have a little better opportunity with him. So then I had it. And the same thing, and he's just this big. But he's a bull calf, So he's male. So immediately those hormones, they've started to kick in already with him. And he just put his head down and he right into my chest. And straight, no horns, fortunately. And he just pushed and pushed and pushed. And he's done that the last few days. And of course, it's not that he has, all of a sudden he decided doesn't appreciate us anymore, he doesn't want the scraps. It's just that that's his body, right? That's what he's going to do. So when you're given a certain body, your nature, it's forcing us, based on our desire and our activities, into different situations. And Prabhupada, he would explain that here in Vrindavan many, many times. Because you come here in the Vrindavan, you see all these creatures climbing up here. Why is this? Look at over above us. All these screens are here because of these monkeys in Vrindavan. So they've been here, when Krishna was here, they were creating trouble. So we can't expect that they're going to be any different. They're just as much trouble. They created trouble when Srila Prabhupada was here. I've told many stories. Srila Prabhupada was here, the monkeys stealing his slippers in his room. One time Jamuna she was cooking in the kitchen at Radha Damodar temple, and the monkey opened the door, the screen door, grabbed the chapati dough right off of the table, took her chapati dough, ran away. Another time Prabhupada was speaking, just like we're speaking here. He was speaking at his room in Radha Damodar temple, and it was in the evening. And in the course of seconds, devotees that were coming in and out. And the nature, monkey means rascal. Prabhupada would say, such rascals, he would always say. They're such rascals, these monkeys. So they were always watching what was going on. You may not know it, but they're also detective-like. So they're seeing, but their only aim is to get food. Whatever they do, the ultimate aim is to get something to eat. So they would watch everyone going into Prabhupada's room, and then they would see if someone was bringing in an offering, a fruit offering, which they did. Back in those days, even the poorest of people, even the widows in Vrindavan, they would come to see a Swami. They would bring a few bananas, an apple, like that. Always bring an offering. So one person came in and she brought a hand, a bunch of bananas, and placed it at Prabhupada's feet. And within seconds, a monkey ran in, grabbed the bananas, and before anyone could do anything, he was out the door, just in a matter of seconds. And Prabhupada said, just see. He said, that's mystic power. Prabhupada always, devalued this idea of mystic opulence. So he said, even this monkey has mystic opulence. He said, who of you could have done that so fast? He said, no one here could have come in, grabbed the bananas, and left within a few seconds. He said, but the monkey did that. No one could even stop him from the moment he opened the door to the moment he left. He said, that's mystic power. No, he said mystic power simply meant doing something someone else can't do. You see someone doing something, you think, oh, I can't do that. Well, to you, that's mystical. So he made it this idea, because in India, of course, we're very excited about the idea of doing so many wonderful things, magic tricks, forming something in the hand, all these things. But to Prabhupada, this was nothing. It just meant I haven't learned the process. So even the monkey, he said, had mystic powers. And then he would always look at all the different forms. When you come to Vrindavan, especially us as Westerners, when we came to India, and particularly in Vrindavan, we saw so many things you would never see back in the West. Here in Vrindavan, we saw the hogs, the camels, the asses, the monkeys, parrots flying about. It was like Westerners, you had to go to a zoo to see all these things in one place, you know. But here, it's part of everyday life. Today, I was going back and forth to a house, and I saw a big camel, you know, big camel, and on the back he was carrying marble, big load of marble behind him on the bed, on the flat bed. But where else do you see these things here? But then Prabhupada, he would say, they've gotten this body, even here in Vrindavan, based on their activities, their desires, and then their karma. He said, so they've come here as monkeys. He said, because these were rascals. He said, in Vrindavan, he said, one takes birth as these animals, the hog. He said, if you're here in Vrindavan and you're eating everything, eating anything, everything, then you come back as a hog. And he said, if you engage in a lot of sex life, then you can come back as a monkey or this. So he was describing all the different animals in Vrindavan and sinful activities that they had performed. He said that forced them to come back in these bodies. Imagine being a dog in Vrindavan, not a very exciting life. So then a devotee said, what about those sadhus along the Jamuna? He said, and they smoke ganja. Prabhupada said, oh, they come back as hippies in San Francisco. The person who asked was from San Francisco. He was, before becoming a devotee, he was hippie in San Francisco smoking ganja. So Prabhupada had a very good sense of humor. So this is what this means. We get these bodies according to our activity. And then if we're not careful, we don't get a human form of life. Then you're forced to get one body after another. So many bodies to suffer and enjoy. So now we're going to move to Calcutta, Prabhupada's birthplace. So I had the opportunity to be with him a few times, many times, going to that place. Prabhupada would often talk about Calcutta being a very beautiful city. That was the British, he called it their crown city. They made it very beautiful because it's, I guess, tropical. So many places there were squares. The remnants of them, they were still there when Prabhupada was with us. And many times we would take morning walk in these places, these parks. And he would say, these very beautiful. They made so many beautiful parks all around. Because they made it the capital city. Calcutta became the capital city when the British were here. And Prabhupada would speak about them, that what they had done was also very nice. Their management, the British management, he said, was very good. Of course, at the same time, they took so much from India, from the deities, the jewels, so many things. He said, but the management level was very nice. He said, in Calcutta, it was a very beautiful city. When Prabhupada grew up here, he said it was a very, very wonderful place. So in the morning walks, he would remember those places. And also, of all the places I went to with Srila Prabhupada, all around the world, Calcutta was different. It was his home. There was a very different feel when Prabhupada arrived back to his home, back in Calcutta. And even when he was at the temple, in Albert Road, I talk about when Prabhupada was in India, how much he gave himself to his disciples. In the West, Prabhupada's life was outside of giving morning class, in the morning walk. It was very private. Prabhupada would be in his quarters. Only sometimes managers would go in. Prabhupada would be giving instructions about the local temple, things like that. But there wasn't so much, there weren't darshan times. But when we came here, my first time here in 1972, I was so surprised to see how Prabhupada, his door was open so much, because this is what the devotees, this was their only pleasure, was Prabhupada's association, because of how difficult it was here in India. But then in Calcutta, it was a whole other level of openness that was there. So much so that when Prabhupada took rest after lunch, he told me to lie across in front of his doors. He had these double doors that open, we say French doors, that are there. So he would have me lay right in front of them so no one went into the room. Because people felt there was this familiarity that was there with some people. They thought they'd just go in and see Prabhupada anytime. And amongst them, his sister was included. She would come and see her brother, her big brother, who she loved so much. But she would think she could see him whenever she wanted. So Prabhupada tried to be give a little restriction. As I said, she loved all the devotees so much, but me not so much. Because I was interfering in her seeing Srila Prabhupada. And when you went to Calcutta, that was one of the wonders as well, is that day when you're sitting in the temple and all of a sudden you see this very tiny lady, older lady, all wrapped up in a Bengali sari style, white widows, and she looks like Prabhupada. This woman comes in that looks like Prabhupada. Of course, it's Prabhupada's sister. So it was very amazing to see. For us, Prabhupada was the supreme person, servant of God. And then to see he had a sister, it actually took a little bit of adjustment in our heads to see Prabhupada's sister. Like, he has a sister? It's like we know Krishna had brother, sister, these things are there. Prabhupada also had a sister, a very wonderful devotee. So she was coming as well. So many were coming. I didn't know many, of course, but old friends, acquaintances. So when I was there, 1972, 1973, so we think when Prabhupada left home, it was around 1955. So this is 20 years after, and 10 years after he had left for America. So coming back to this place, and the way it was situated from what I see now was the same. Prabhupada had his front doors, 2 front doors. So for him to go into the temple room, he would go out those front doors, and there was the veranda. He would go along the veranda, and then there were doors open to the temple, where the deities were at the back of that room. And sometimes during Mangal Arati, Prabhupada, he would just walk out of his room. He was always up very early, 2 o'clock in the morning. So he would walk out, and sometimes he would just stand at the back. He wouldn't go up, because then everybody would become aware of him. But he would just stand at the back, and he would look at the deities. And then he would go back to his room. One time he said something very significant there. He went there, and then the next day he went there at Mangal Arati. And at the back was Kirti Prabhu. And he said, "Where were you yesterday morning?" And Prabhupada was there the day before. And Prabhupada always saw everything. You want to talk about detective. Nothing escaped Prabhupada's vision somehow, in his consciousness. So he said to him, where were you yesterday morning? Because he didn't see him at Mangalarti. And Kirti said, oh, Prabhupada, we went to your home and saw your deities there. And Prabhupada said, this is your home. Imagine now, consider that. This was the home. This was in Calcutta, Prabhupada's home. And he went to Prabhupada's home, the Mullaks, to see the original deities Prabhupada was worshiping. Who could find anything wrong with that? How can you find any fault in doing that, going to that place? Of course, we go there, it's very nice. But at Mangalarti, Prabhupada said to him, this is your home. He said, you worship here. You go to Mangalarti here. Yes, Prabhupada. So many times he said similar things here. Why are you out there? He said, we have our temple here. Prabhupada was very loyal to everything he had given us. And this is what was important. So sometimes Prabhupada said even being in Calcutta was a little difficult. He said because of that, he said the skin, because he knew people from early life. So things are different when it's like that. You say that when you go back home, you're not seen in the same way as when you're traveling. We even experience that. You're living in one place, just like I was in Noida Temple the other day. Well, they took such nice care of me, visiting for a few days, brought me everything, did everything. But then when you go back home, you realize you're just another person, and just another servant in the temple, just another devotee in the temple. But when you travel about, they're very happy to see you, very happy to take care of you, to do some service. So even Prabhupada mentioned that when he went to Calcutta, that going home, things were very different. And it was a little difficult to take care of Prabhupada in that situation, because it was home. So sometimes, of course, in the morning he would go in the car. He would go to different places. He would go for walks, his morning walk. So we would be driven to different places. Right across the street from the temple, there's, what's it called? What do they call the tank? Pond is there. So that pond, staying at Calcutta Temple was very difficult. I never used the bathroom when I was there in Calcutta Temple. Everyone had to use it. It was one bathroom, so men were there, women were there. It was on the way to the women's ashram. It was very complicated. So I would go into that pond, the tank across the street in the morning, which was also a very pretty area. But then there were rumors that there were spirits in the bottom of the pond. And then if you went out too far, they'd pull you down. So I would go in there and bathe early in the morning sometimes, but I was always afraid to go over my head because someone might pull me under. We would see a Chutananda. He was very sannyasi. He was a little big. He would float. He could just lie there and float at the top of the water. He wouldn't move, Chutananda Swami. He would just put his hands behind his head and lie back like he was lying on a bed on this pond. So I don't know, maybe the spirits that were holding him up or something, I don't know. So on one of those drives, we went past the school, Prabhupada's school, and he said there was a field there. They call it a pitch. In England, the British, they call it the pitch. It was a football field. And Prabhupada said that I was on the football team here. And he pointed, he said, I was on the football team here. He said, and I played the goalie. He said, I was goalkeeper. He said, because I didn't like to run around. So that was the only position on the team where you didn't run. So Prabhupada was not into running a lot. He found He laughed. He found a position where he could just stay still, more or less. But he showed what was going on. So when he was there, of course, he also had his memories of his youth. And he described, other times he described his youth. Many times he talked about growing up in Calcutta. And he said, we weren't, he lived there with wealthy family. He said, we weren't wealthy family. He said, but we had everything we needed. He said, in mango season, he said, mentioned his sister. He said, my sister and I, we would run around and play in the house. He said, we would run up and down the stairs, go up on the roof, come back down. We'd run through the kitchen. He said, and we'd grab a mango. He said, there'd be a big basket of mangoes, and we'd grab a mango. He said, we didn't have to ask. That meant there was plenty. The meaning was there's plenty there. He said, we didn't have to ask, can I have a mango? He said, everything was available. He said, so we'd grab a mango, eat a mango, and then go running. And then he talked about, of course, his mother and father. He said, my mother, he said she was first-class cook. Because that night before taking rest, he had puffed rice. And he said, my mother, she made first-class puffed rice. He said, and she would make it. She would puff the rice. He said there was a special wok. It's a very thick wok. And then you would bring the fire very high. And somehow you would put in the rice, and the rice would all puff. Then, of course, you would make the chons. You have muri. So this was one of his favorite preparations. And he had it very often in the evening. He would say, give me muri and milk. So that's what he said, because it was light. Which then he would eat light. He said then he could get up early in the morning to translate. So he said, you make muri. So then that night when he went to take rest, he said, my mother, she made very first class puffed rice. And he said she cooked it. He said, my mother, she was first class cook. And he said, my sister, she also was first class cook. And he said, my mother taught her everything, how to cook. He said, and I'm also a first-class cook. He said, with a little pride. He said, I'm also first. He said, but I learned just by watching. Because you didn't teach the men in the kitchen, you taught the girls in the kitchen. And he said, and when growing up, he said, on the block, he said, we'd have, when there were festival days, different festivals, he said everyone on the street, they would cook different preparations. So they would arrange, coordinate, and have a big block party. Everyone would make preparation, he said, and everyone would come together for a festival. So he had, in that way, he described very joyous childhood. And he said, my mother, man, he said, when I was young, he said, my mother, she had a friend across the street. And if she would go visit her friend across the street, she would be picked up in a carriage. He said she didn't even walk across the street. We're talking about just a few hundred feet. He said they would send a carriage, it would pick her up, she would get inside, and it would drive her to the other side. He said it was so strict. You can imagine Srila Prabhupada going to America in 1965, trying to think, how am I going to give Krishna consciousness to these people? This is the culture Prabhupada grew up in. In Los Angeles once, in his room in New Dwarka, he was looking out the window, and he saw a young boy and girl, being intimate in some way. And he said to me, he said, just see. He said, in your country, he said, boy sees a girl, and he goes up to her, and he said, come on, let's, this is Prabhupada, come on, let's you and I go, we'll have some fun. He said, when we were young, he said, same desires were there. He said, desires, and that's what we're talking about here, these bodies. Desires come along with the body. You're given a body according to your desire. And he said, so desires were there. He said, but we wouldn't even think of talking to a girl. You might think about it, but that was it. There was no question that you would go up to her and even say something. He said, but here, look, he said, just see. He said, but that's the Vedic culture, he said. But this is what Prabhupada came to when he came to the West. And that's when he mentioned this story about his mother. He said she wouldn't even go across the street without an escort. Without an escort, a carriage taking her to see her friend. Once he said, in Mayapur, this was at the festival, and he would stand on the veranda very often, and he would look out over many open places then, and he saw a devotee couple talking just out in the open. He said they were talking together, and Prabhupada looked at me. He said, what is this fish? He called it fish. You know that expression? Do you ever hear that expression? Yeah? Yeah, side talk. Called the fish. So what is that? He said, tell him to stop. So this was one level, especially when Prabhupada came here. Yeah, especially when he came here. In America, he must have just chanted. Now I know why he was always chanting japa in America. He was just, because he probably wanted to tell us all the time, you people, you're making me chant a whole lot. You know? He would come to India and he would try to instill in us the culture that was here, how we should observe culture here. Like he said that in Vrindavan, in Mayapur, to be so careful in these places. So, so many things, of course, went on in Calcutta. I talked so much about his sister already. You have those notes, Prabhupada and his sister. The first thing I became aware of in Calcutta, of course, were the sweets. Calcutta is, I think, maybe 50% of the population has diabetes in Calcutta. There's like, that's just my own estimate, because they eat more sugar, I think, than any place in the whole world, you know. Every corner is another sweet shop. And Prabhupada liked those sweets. And these are the sweets Prabhupada gave us. You know, these are the sweets Prabhupada gave us to offer to the deities before in Mangala time. Sandesh, Rasgula, sweet rice, kheer, rabri. This is what he taught us. And of course, all these things are there in Calcutta. And he would tell them to go, and it was considered, that was like Temple Prashadam, K.C. Das. K.C. Das. If you live there, everyone knows K.C. Das. They had, now of course you can buy in the can, rasgullas, everything from K.C. Das. So they were regularly in Prabhupada's room. So when guests come, they were always getting first class sandesh. What's the other one with they're always making triangles with the...
Barfi?
Not burfi, no. Yeah, pistachio is yeah. So that was also one of the favorites. So these were always sitting on the plate, always there. And of course, we were very attracted to these things. We means me. I was also. And Misti Dahi, this is where you got the first class. These are the things Prabhupada's sister would bring to the temple. She had nothing. She had no money, but somehow she'd be coming to the temple with the big pots, clay pots, misty, very dark, tan color. It was so good. So one day I went into Prabhupada's room, and he had this box of sweets, and of course there were ants everywhere on the sweets, you know, always ants. So I thought, well, I have to take these out of the room. And of course I'm thinking, I'll take them out of the room, I'll blow the ants off, and I'll eat them all. So I went in very sheepishly. I said, Prabhupada, I said, these sweets covered in ants. Prabhupada looked, he said, they don't eat very much. So right away he said, you're not getting these sweets. You know, he let me know. And then he said, so you go back to the kitchen, he said, and bring a thali and a katuri. He said, and fill the thali with water. He said, and I'll show you what to do. So of course I went back and we put the thali down and had water in it. And he said, now you put the katuri upside down and you put the sweets on top. He said, now no ants. No ants. But he didn't waste and he didn't give them to me, those sweets. So a lot of times darshan, every evening, Prabhupada would just let everyone come into his room. When we first arrived at that place, when we went into the room and I set everything up. And again, we just slept on the veranda outside of his room. At least I did, right outside his room. So we arrived and he called me in. He said, so, he says, does your nose work? I said, huh? He said, does your nose work? He said, do you snore? I said, oh no, Prabhupada. I said, my nose works, it's okay. He said, good. He said, because it doesn't work. He said, you can't sleep there. Because I had to sleep right outside his room. This was the sweetest thing, of course. Massage he would take right on the veranda. And he would take on the outside portion of the veranda. Now it's all closed in, I think, right?
Because office there?
Yeah. But at the time, that was like outside. Yeah. So he would take, because then the sun, it was late morning. So that's where he would take on the veranda, on the inner veranda, or outside. He would take his massage.
Where the stairs end? In front of the stairs?
Yeah, just before the stairs. Yeah, just before the stairs. So the same place is still there. Of course, they've done so much at Albert Road in Calcutta. It's beautiful. And the deities, they've been there, I don't know, what year did they get installed? 71. So before Chandanyatra?
That was in 23rd May.
May.
That was first Pandal program. Prabhupada installed them in the Pandal program, not in the temple.
But you could see it was Prabhupada's home, the way you didn't see that anywhere else, where Prabhupada would just walk out of his room, walk in and out of the temple room, walk around on the veranda. It was like it was very informal. In so many ways, it seemed very informal. And that was something to get used to. And then, of course, as I said, his sister, there in Calcutta, when Prabhupada was in Calcutta, you could be sure she would come. We called her Bishima, auntie. Her name was Baba Tarini. And as I said, she looked like Prabhupada, but she was shorter. She had black glasses, black rimmed glasses. Very wonderful. And she always carried a little bottle of Ganga Jal. And whenever she saw any of us, she would sprinkle us. I think she did it so she could associate with us. You know, she'd purify us with Ganga Jal. She said, it's Ganga. So she was very saintly. And she loved to cook. Prabhupada said she was expert cook, and Prabhupada loved her cooking. Once, and of course there again in Calcutta, we grew up with Prabhupada from the time he came to America. Everything he gave us, every food he prepared was prepared with ghee. All we ever had was ghee. We never had oil of any kind. And Prabhupada said that. He said, oil's for the outside of the body. Ghee is for the inside. And in every temple, devotees knew how to make ghee, how to take butter and turn it into ghee in a few hours. And on Sunday, the Sunday feast meant opulent prasadam. We made halava, puris, samosa, of pakoras. So everything was cooked in ghee, fried in ghee, cooked with ghee. So Sunday morning or Saturday night, you always made a big wok of ghee, so you had enough ghee for the feast. But in Calcutta, of course, people were accustomed to cooking in mustard oil. And Prabhupada told us, that was for the outside. And I carried mustard oil all the time, all around the world, but I always just put it on Prabhupada's body. But Pishima, she would come to the temple with mustard oil. She'd tuck it into her sari, everything tucked into her sari. And she didn't wear a choli, Pishima, she just had like 10 yards of cloth. She just wrapped around and around and around her. So she would tuck whatever, so that was like a secret ingredient. That was her secret ingredient. Sometimes when you make something, that was good, what's in there? I'm not telling you, it has a secret ingredient. So that was her ingredient, was mustard oil. So we cooked for Prabhupada the same way he taught us from the beginning. So we cooked everything, a little bit of ghee, we made our chances. So when he got to Calcutta, his sister cooked, and we cooked. So of course, everything she cooked in mustard oil. And she was even, very expert. Like if you see Jamuna's book, you'll see it wasn't just you went and bought any mustard oil. There's very many grades, qualities of mustard oil. How it was pressed, where it came from, at different smells, different colors. So it was very special. And Prabhupada, I would bring him a plate. He had a table. There'd be one plate. There was the ISKCON plate of prasadam and the Pishima plate of prasadam on Prabhupada's table. So he would have his massage, then he'd take a shower, say Gayatri, and then he would sit down, and I'd bring in one plate and I'd bring in the other plate. So this went on day after day. So finally, after 3 days, I walked into Prabhupada's room, I put down the ISKCON plate, ISKCON prasadam, and I went back and I brought in the Pishima prasadam. And Prabhupada, I'm at the door with it. Prabhupada looks, he said, "Don't bring that in here." He said, "My sister's trying to kill me." He looked at me, he said, "You eat it." And I said, Prabhupada, I said, "I'm already sick." I said, I'm sick in India all the time, but I said, "I can't eat that." He said, "Well, give it to the devotees." He said, "But don't bring it in here." He said, "She's trying to kill me." So this was, of course, he said that because he liked it very much. And if I put it down, he was going to eat it. It wasn't that he didn't like it, but maybe it wasn't digesting. It was very heavy. So then, of course, we would tell Pishima. Prabhupada said, "Ooh," she didn't like that. She said, "Prabhupada can digest nails," she said. So she saw Prabhupada was transcendental personality. She said he could eat nails, she said. It doesn't matter. And she was maybe in some ways like her brother Prabhupada. She didn't, you couldn't tell her not to do something like Prabhupada. You couldn't tell him something wasn't possible. He said, impossible, he said, is a word in a fool's dictionary. So that didn't exist. And she was also like that. She was a little stubborn. But she loved her brother very, very much. So she was always there. And then, of course, I told many times. And she would come and she would talk. Of course, never understood. She would talk in Bengali, Prabhupada. They'd have conversations. She'd be in the room. So I think sometimes Prabhupada thought, this is why when he went to Calcutta, it was like, it's like going home. You go home, you have to listen to your family again. It's like, I left all of that. Left all those things. So then the one morning, late morning, I'm massaging him, and he just starts laughing and laughing. And I'm rubbing his back, and he said, "Do you know anyone," he said, "who's gotten fat without eating?" And I said, "No, Prabhupada." He said, "Neither do I." He said, "But my sister, she tells me that she hardly eats anything." He said, "But she's so fat." And I'm laughing, and Prabhupada's laughing. He said, she tells me she doesn't feel good, and I tell her, well, don't eat so much. And she says, I hardly eat. And so he's telling me his whole conversation with his sister. He said, and I tell her, well, don't eat. You're eating too much. And she says, no, I hardly eat anything. He said, and then I say, well, how can you hardly eat anything and you're so fat? So it was hysterical. Prabhupada's talking. And he said, he said, you're right. Sometimes Prabhupada would ask questions, and then he would say, what do you think? It was a wonderful chance. If Prabhupada asked your opinion, it was so wonderful, and then he'd say, very nice. He'd say, I think you're right, he would say. He'd be so happy to say something to Prabhupada. So then that evening, Prabhupada, as usual, every evening, his 10 devotees, all his Western disciples sitting in there, just soaking up Prabhupada nectar, just being around him. And he's talking, and his sister walks in the room. And she would come in, and just like with the rest of us, she would come in, she would offer her obeisances. She was just like one of our ISKCON devotees, She just loved her brother. She'd offer obeisances to him, then she sat up, and then she waddled, because she was big. She was short, but she was wide. So she walked over and sat right in the corner. And of course, while I was going, everybody's watching. Prabhupada stops for a minute and looks, and she sits down. And then Prabhupada looks at everyone, and he said, just see my sister. See how fat she is. And the devotees were shocked. And then he told the whole story, he said to me in the morning. He said, she says she doesn't eat anything. And I say, well, how can you not eat and you're so fat? And the devotees, everyone's laughing so hard, they're crying. And Pishima's there, and she's laughing with everyone. Because everyone's laughing, so what do you laugh? But she didn't understand a word that was being said. But we knew they had a wonderful relationship. Prabhupada encouraged her. But he went on and on. He said, I told her. Devotees, they'd never heard anything like this before. I never heard anything like before or after from Prabhupada. But he was just having a little fun. And for us, in India, we needed so much. It was very difficult. It was very austere. Living in Calcutta Temple was especially austere. There was no facility there. But all these places to Prabhupada, they were so important. Of course, he said, they should build a very beautiful temple. That's still going on, yes? So it was an important place. It's Prabhupada's birthplace. Imagine what an important place. Just like here. Why are we here? This is where Krishna appeared and performed his pastime, so they're so important. So it's such a wonderful place. It's not just a place to stop on the way to Mayapur. You have to make a very beautiful temple there for Srila Prabhupada. And of course it will happen. Do you have any questions about it? Does he have any questions? Look, yes, Vishaki, you know something? I was very early on. It was in Bombay, in December '73, and I was massaging Prabhupada. There's two scar stories. And I was rubbing Prabhupada's leg, his right leg, I believe. And there was a scar on Prabhupada's leg. He had gumcha, so it was up. And he said, you see that scar? And I go, yes, Prabhupada. He said, when I was young boy, he said, I was playing in front of my house. He said, and I was playing with matches. He said, and somehow or other, he said, my clothes, my dhoti just went on fire. And he said, I was helpless. He said, and out of nowhere, Prabhupada said it, it made it sound very, very mystical. He said, a man appeared out of nowhere. He said, and he just put it out. And then he left. He said, that scars from that time. That's Prabhu. So then the other scar, Prabhupada had a scar on his forehead. Little scar. Just a little crease on his forehead. So he was also telling stories. It was the night when he was talking about the puffed rice in his childhood. When Prabhupada would talk about his childhood, it was the most amazing thing because it was like a motion picture. It was like you saw everything. It was so detailed. His memory was just incredible. He said he remembers, well, in a letter he said, and also he said in a letter to the Mal Krishna, he said, never do I remember a time. He said, there was never a time I remember when I did not remember Krishna. Not any time in my life was I forgetful of Krishna, he said. And then he said, I remember being in my sister's arms, maybe 6 months old. A 6-month-old child. He said he remembers being held at 6 months. So he would talk about these things, and he would talk about it with such, not just emotion, he would make it so real. He would talk about people, and he would change his voice when he spoke. He would take on the different people as he talked. So it was like a one-man play. He would take on all the different characters. And so when he would talk about his mother, he would say how she said things, and not that he talked like a woman, but he would change his voice. He would give different voices. So then he said, you see this? He said, when I was young, he said he was in the market with his father. He said, and we were, went past where they had the toys.